Hello, my lovely anatomist and physiologist, Michele Glass here. Thank you for sticking with me for chapter 10. Our conversation here in this video is all about our favorite molecule, adenosine triphosphate, or of course, we also know this as our old friend ATP. This is, of course, our energy molecule, and we've seen that it is required for every single myosin head has to have a new ATP in order to detach as a key step of that cross bridge cycle, part of the muscle contraction. So as we talk about ATP, let's kind of pick up a few pieces of information here. So we just mentioned that the ATP molecule is required for the cross bridge detachment. So every single myosin head is requiring ATP. That's like a huge input of ATP. ATP is going to be broken down by the myosin head. We already mentioned that it has, as part of its structure, ATPase, which is the enzyme that's important, and breaking down the ATP into the adenosine diphosphate, phosphate, and the energy. And we've said that this is important for that myosin head to do the detachment, but also the recocking and the re-energizing. And then we also see that ATP is going to be important to fuel the calcium ion pumps in the SR. So we need to be able to pump that calcium back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum in order to, kind of stop this muscle contraction, right? That was one of our important stops. When we're looking at how our ATP is made by the cell, by muscle cells, we're going to see that it's regenerated by a new molecule that we're going to talk about, creatine phosphate metabolism. So we're going to have this new molecule to talk about in this video here, creatine phosphate. We're going to have anaerobic respiration, anaerobic glycolysis. The term anaerobic means no oxygen is required. No oxygen is required. And then we have another option of aerobic respiration. Anaerobic respiration means oxygen is required, and this is happening at the mitochondria. This is, remember, our ATP powerhouse of the cell, right? So what we're going to see is, depending on the cell and depending on the type of activity that's going on with the body, meaning like how much ATP demand is there, how much activity is going on, our cells can kind of shift between these three different ways of getting that ATP. So that's where we go next. Okay, let's talk first about creatine phosphate metabolism. And the creatine phosphate is a molecule that can store energy. It can have those high energy phosphate bonds. So it's basically just going to store energy in the phosphate bonds. It's going to be created when the muscle is resting. When the muscle is resting. So the muscle is not, actively doing a particular contraction at this time. That would be our resting muscle. And it's going to provide about 15 seconds of energy. So it's just like a tiny little boost while other reactions are occurring. So basically, this is happening at rest. You have more ATP being formed than you need it. You're going to pair that ATP with a molecule called creatine. And this is going to give you your creatine phosphate, and then also your ADP, right? So you're basically pulling off an ATP, pulling off a phosphate from your ATP, getting an ADP, and then a creatine phosphate. And then we're going to have the enzyme creatine kinase, which is going to help break this down into creatine and then the ATP. And then the ATP can be used for your cross-bridge detachment. So I'm just writing used during contractions. Okay, that's your creatine phosphate. So it's being produced at rest, and then it can be used when you're at a higher level of activity. The next description we had was anaerobic glycolysis. And the key feature of anaerobic glycolysis is that there's no oxygen being required here for this particular process. This is happening in the cytoplasm. We don't have to have a special organelle for this particular process to happen. This can give us about 1 minute of activity. This is really great for like short bursts, high intensity. So short bursts, high intensity. And so you're either taking your glycolysis, you're either taking your glycogen, breaking it down into glucose, or you're taking your glucose from your bloodstream, and you're going to break that down. This is the process of glycolysis. And you're going to get a little bit of ATP, and you're going to get this molecule called pyruvic acid. You don't get a whole lot of ATP. You just get a little bit. You get about 2 that the cell can use through this process of glycolysis. Now that pyruvic acid, we can do some stuff with that. So it's that pyruvic acid that's going to be important in the aerobic respiration, which we're going to look at next. Or we can convert that into lactic acid. Okay, so I needed a little bit more room, so I've just rewritten where we left off. So remember, we're looking at what's going to happen with that pyruvic acid. Now, one of the things that we can do with that pyruvic acid, if there's oxygen available, is we can do aerobic respiration. So aerobic respiration is really our most efficient way to make ATP. It's aerobic, so that does mean with oxygen, and this is occurring at the mitochondria. So remember, we talked about the mitochondria as the powerhouse of the cell. Now, the oxygen that we're getting is either going to come directly from the bloodstream. So it does take a little bit of time to mobilize that oxygen and get it to your cells as needed. Or we can actually have stores of oxygen in a muscle cell using the molecule called myoglobin. So myoglobin is a way of storing some extra oxygen in that muscle cell. So as long as you have oxygen that you're able to recruit from the bloodstream, or you've stored in the cell in the form of the myoglobin, you're able to do this aerobic respiration. This is really helping us get energy when our muscle is resting or when our muscle is doing moderate level of activity. It's giving us like 95% of our energy pretty much during that time. Now we can do aerobic respiration. We can start with breaking down glucose like we did with the glycolysis example, We can start with the breaking down of the pyruvic acid molecule, also like what we're looking at here, or we can break down fatty acids. So we can do aerobic respiration using either glucose, pyruvic acid, or fatty acid as a starting material. And we're getting back carbon dioxide gas, we're getting produce water molecule, and then we're also getting like a whole lot of ATP. So we're getting a whole lot of ATP here. If you don't have oxygen available, so if your muscle is working so quickly that you're not able to get the oxygen from the bloodstream to the cell, or if you don't have stores of oxygen in the case of the myoglobin, then that pyruvic acid is going to be converted to lactic acid. And this process is going to be called lactic acid fermentation. Lactic acid fermentation is this conversion of pyruvic acid to lactic acid. And this is occurring when you have very high level strenuous activity. And what we see is this leads to muscle fatigue. So we've already mentioned that you can have muscle fatigue when you run out of ATP. But what we see here is with this buildup of lactic acid, you're going to reduce the pH of your cell. And this is going to like reduce the activity of your enzymes, and your proteins are not going to be as effective. Remember way back in chapter 2, we talked about protein structure, and we said it has to be shaped exactly right to work exactly right. And we said the environment, including pH, can be a factor in protein structure. So what we see is this buildup of lactic acid lowers the pH of the cell. That's changing the environment. And so the enzymes that we need for these processes, the proteins, the contractile proteins, are not, fitting together in the way that they should. So with the muscle fatigue, we can see here the decrease in the pH as a result of the lactic acid. We've also mentioned if you run out of ATP, that's going to lead to muscle fatigue. And then we can also see an imbalance in the ions sodium, potassium, and calcium, contributing to muscle fatigue as well. Okay. Stay tuned for more information on muscle. We're ready to start looking at it as like a whole organ instead of so much at the cellular level. So stay tuned, take a break when you need to, and as always, take care of yourselves and each other.